Hey guys, it's Haley and welcome to another bookish video. It's another day of happy Haley days. I hope you guys are having a good December. In today's recommendation video, we're going to get into a top 12 video. I love filming these top 12 videos. I have an entire playlist of so many of these. If you're not sick of the content, you can watch all of them. I will link the playlist up above, down below, all the places. In my top 12 recommendation videos, I take a concept, a genre, a trope, a subgenre, something of the sort, and I give you my top 12 recommendations within that category. Today we have a highly requested subgenre, which is magical realism. I really love books with magical realism. If you don't know what magical realism is, this is my definition. Girl, if it's not right, if it's not technical, nobody tell me. Okay, just let me live in ignorance. This is the definition that I've made up in my brain. This is the definition that I've gathered by hearing other people's recommendations, by hearing other books described as magical realism, by colloquially existing in the book space. I'm not technical, and I can already hear the comments saying, actually, and you know what? Just let me live in ignorance. I'm not going to read your comment. To me personally, magical realism is a book that could take place in reality, a contemporary story that exists as is, except for a few magical elements. It doesn't take place in some far off fantasy land. There's no complex magic system. It wouldn't be right to call these books fantasy, but there are some magical elements to them. And these are some of my favorite books. I love books with time travel elements, with some speculative elements. I feel like you could also call some of these books speculative fiction, and I really like that genre as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my top 12 magical realism recommendations. We're gonna start off really strong. This was my favorite book of a couple years ago. It struck me so deeply. I find that magical realism books really hit deep a lot of the time because it kind of gives you a little bit of externalization. Like, the magic thing that's going on isn't real, so it's easy to give into it. It doesn't feel like as much of a vulnerable stretch to let yourself imagine what it would be like to be in this situation, and then all of a sudden the metaphor hits you, or the reality of the magical realism hits you, and it's like, oh, you tricked me with cutesy little time travel, and now I'm here processing trauma. And that's exactly what I felt when I read this book, One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. I think Rebecca Searle does magical realism better than a lot of other authors that I've read, and I love every single one of her books. Most of her books have a magical element to them. In this book, basically we're following our main character who just lost her mother, and her mother died while they were in the planning process to take this trip together to Italy, to the Amalfi Coast. And her mother spent significant time in the Amalfi Coast when she was in her 20s, so she really wanted to share that with her daughter. They were going to connect over that, but obviously she ends up dying before they get the chance to go on the trip. Our main character decides to go ahead and take the trip anyway, solo, and while she's there, she ends up running into that past version of her mother who's in her 20s and taking the trip not with her elderly mother in present day, but with the version of her mother who lived on the Amalfi Coast when she did. And you see a lot of intricate attachment dynamics, intricate relationship dynamics. Our main character learns a lot about herself and her family dynamic. It is extremely emotional, heartwarming. It's also just a beautiful book. Like, the way that it's written feels like a vacation. All of the ways that Italy is described, it just sounds like a dream. This is a perfect vacation book. It made me want to go to Italy so bad. The setting, the atmosphere is gorgeous. The character development is the shining star of the book, and it was just the easiest 5-star ever. I felt so emotionally invested. I loved the trajectory of the story and the fact that it was so character driven, which most of Rebecca Searle's books are. This is just the cream of the crop for magical realism for me. Next up, we have some horror, and I think there are quite a few like speculative horror books that I could mention in this video. I only have a couple because I was really trying to keep it to general fiction. This one isn't too horrified, but it is by a horror author, one of my favorite horror authors, who is Eric LaRocca. This is one of their books, We Can Never Leave This Place, and it's set in an apartment. Literally the entire time we're just in an apartment. You can picture yourself there. We're with a family and their weird family dynamic, which you can probably picture as well pretty easily. The catch is the magical element is almost like a James and the Giant Peach situation. There are basically these giant bugs that move into the house with this family, and you see what happens. There's also like post-apocalyptic vibes. It's not too scary, but it does have that like weird gross factor of these giant bugs, and really, really great commentary about the family dynamics through that. I think it's really cleverly written, and I don't know how to categorize it genre-wise. It feels genre-defying to me. It's written so well. It's trippy, it's meaningful, it's all of the things that I want in my speculative fiction, really. And I mentioned an Eric LaRocca book recently, their new one in my horror vlog. I'll link it up above and down below if you missed it, but I read an arc of their book that's coming out in January. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars, and I got some comments asking like, where do I start with Eric LaRocca? Such a big backlist. I don't know where to go. This would be a great one to start if you like fantasy, if you like speculative. You will get into it so quick. Next up, we have How to Be Eaten by Maria Adelman, and this is actually a recent read from this year. We're following some women in group therapy. They're all trauma survivors, and they're trying to support each other, understand each other, come to this common place. As they share their stories, we begin to realize that every single one of them is basically a girl from a fairy tale. So we have like Princess Ariel, we have Princess Cinderella, we have Gretel from Hansel and Gretel, we have Little Red Riding Hood. Like, all of these women's stories very closely mirror the fairy tales that little girls are told growing up, and it kind of investigates through that fantastical lens of what happened to them, how traumatic these ideas that young girls take in actually are. It's great commentary, great use of speculative elements within this book. I will say the end did fall flat for me. It kind of takes a weird turn, but for the most of the story, I really, really enjoyed it, especially the character dynamics. Maybe that's why I love magical realism so much. It really says a lot about how the characters react when this wrench is thrown into their reality, and I think because I love character-driven stories so much, I just respond really well to that. Next up, I have a rec that's a little bit lighter. This one is so fun, and it actually got me out of a slump, so if you're feeling slumpy, this one might be for you. It is Suburban Hell by Maureen Kilmer, and this is your typical like chick-litty women hanging out in the cul-de-sac talking shit, rich people drama type of beat, but one of them gets possessed. Okay, that's the whole magical piece of this. One of the women does a little pour one out on the she shed. That's literally what happens in the opening scene of the book. They're all drinking wine in the area where one woman's gonna have her she shed built. And they're like, let's pour one out. And they pour one out for the she shed. And then she gets possessed. And we see how all of these hoity-toity women react to it. It's actually a really sweet story. Yes, there's rich people drama. Yes, it's funny. But it's also very heartwarming to see these women coming together. It's really fun. It's really fast-paced. It's an easy read, and I just love that it's your typical like rich people drama thriller, but this little fantastical twist thrown in there. Next up, let's talk about Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. I love this book. We are following a nanny who goes to take care of some children, but there's a catch. These are not your normal children. Once they get upset and start to throw a tantrum, they actually burst into flames. And it's about attachment relationships. We see how this girl starts dealing with these children, and it has really great commentary on parenting. I actually read another book by Kevin Wilson called Perfect Little World. I didn't like it as much as I enjoyed Nothing to See Here. It's not quite as darkly funny, which is what I really liked about this one, but it also has great commentary about parenting. I think that's something Kevin Wilson does really well, and through this metaphor, this speculative concept of children who burst into flames, it's so funny and so ridiculous, but once you cut through that, it's so real, and it speaks on really visceral things that we feel as parents, as children, as women a lot, because the pressure of motherhood usually lies on a woman. It's really short. It's a really great audiobook. I highly recommend it. Next up, I have a YA book for you, and that is Full Tilt by Neil Shusterman. Okay, this is a classic, I feel. This is about a little group of kids, a la like It or Stranger Things. You know the type of group dynamic that I'm talking about. And they end up coming across this magical carnival, okay? It's never there, but it just pops up one day, and they end up getting sucked into it because one of the boys goes, and it's that kid's older brother that's like, oh my god, we can't lose him, we have to go in after him. And they get sucked into this magical carnival, which is just in the middle of their town, somehow randomly popped up overnight, and they go through these slightly magical rides in order to find the missing boy who went in first. Every ride is kind of a metaphor for something that the kids have going on, some part of their trauma. It's actually very deeply meaningful and well-written trauma rep. I was really surprised to see this from a YA book, but I think it did it really well. And if you like that like classic setup of the group of kids, found family, and you want a little bit of speculative fun in there, I also love the carnival setting, you're gonna love this one too. Next up, let's talk about one that y'all probably knew was gonna be in here because I love time travel. Oh my god, it took everything in me to not just fill this entire rec video with time travel books. I did try to make it a little bit even and include different types of the magical realism, but this is gotta be one of my favorites. Before the Coffee Gets Cold, by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I love this series so much. This is about a little coffee shop, normal little coffee shop in Tokyo, but they have a magical chair. And if you sit in the chair, you can time travel. There are rules for time travel, okay? You can only stay in the seat the entire time, whether you go into the past or the future. You can't leave your seat. And you can only stay there for as long as it takes for your coffee to go cold. And if you don't, then you're stuck, basically in purgatory in the chair. And each one of these stories, I believe there are 5 or 6 in the series at this point, includes 4 to 5 different vignettes of people who come in the coffee shop and how they choose to time travel and the meaning that they take away from it. It is really beautiful. It's about humanity and human connection, attachment again, but through this really effective metaphor. I mean, this is what I love about magical realism. These are short, they're really easy to read, but they pack an emotional punch. I love the quirky characters. I love the cozy setting. I just love everything about it. Next up, we have one of my favorites from this year, a very easy 5-star. As soon as I read it, I knew this was going to be a new favorite, and that is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. We are following this woman whose father is in the hospital, and I believe she like just got out of a relationship, or she's considering getting out of her relationship with her long-term partner. So she just has a lot of like pending grief happening, and she decides to take a getaway. She goes into the middle of the desert and is like, you know what? I'm just gonna separate myself from all of this, maybe feel it, maybe work, I don't know, I just need some distance. And while she's on a hike through the desert by her B&B, she ends up coming across this massive cactus, and she goes into it and goes on this kind of like psychedelic trippy journey where she has to survive in the desert and confront all of these things from her past and present, confront her feelings of grief, the overwhelm that she's she's feeling within her relationships, the attachment that she feels to her partner and her father. It's very much eldest daughter, daddy issue coded. And y'all don't need to read into that or think anything about me because of it. It is at the same time like very dark and real and visceral, but also very funny and light and easy to read. It's just that perfect juxtaposition that I think Melissa Broder does really, really well. I love most of her books, but this one is my favorite. Dipping a bit back into horror, but this isn't too horror-y. Like, if you don't like horror, if you get scared easily, you will be totally fine reading this book. It's categorized as horror because the author is typically a horror author, and there is some horror in here, but it is light, it is digestible, it is, I dare say, cozy. And that is Cackle by Rachel Harrison. Okay, we're following a woman who uproots her life, leaves this relationship, moves to a small town, and she's trying to figure out where she fits in this small town. And so she starts making friends. She makes friends with this one woman in particular, and the rest of the townspeople start warning her, hey, you've made friends with the local witch. And we start unlocking all of these little magical elements within this very typical, relatable story at the outset. It is so cozy. The atmosphere is beautiful, amazing, perfect, literally perfect to read this time of year. A lot of people want to read this around Halloween, but there are so many cold weather scenes in here. I feel like it's perfect for winter too. And there are Thanksgiving and Christmas scenes in here as well. So if you want to read it this time of year, I think it would be mint, just absolutely perfect for that. And the magical elements of like the witchery and how we exclude people that we think are different and how we can actually find each other and blah, 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 blah. It is so wonderful. The story is really driven by our main character's development, and I love that. It was so meaningful, but also just a really generally enjoyable read. Jumping back into a YA book, I have A Slice of Cherry by Dia Reeves. This is about two twins who are murderous. They have these murderous desires that they talk about, and they both start feeling into them. And not only do they have the urge to kill, they also have the urge to kind of like dissociate and escape, which I think many women have felt all of those urges, probably all at the same time. And we're following these young girls as they do that, and through this process they unlock this like mind palace secret fantasy escape world that they can like hop into like a portal, and they start to realize what kind of possibilities lie in unlocking this world. There's also an added mystery element because their father is a convicted serial killer, and we're trying to figure out, was this something that was truly like passed down the generations? Did their father actually do it? Did they learn from him? What was the reasoning? Like all of these questions about their development and kind of like nature versus nurture. There's so many layers to this book, especially for a YA. I could not believe it when I read it that this is YA. It is pretty intense, but again, like not too intense because it still is YA. If this sounds appealing to you at all, I would really highly suggest you give it a shot. I never hear anyone talk about this one, but it was so good. Perfect balance of that like reality, commentary, and also like fantasy magic. Next up, we have another one of my all-time favorite books, and that is Una Out of Order by Margarita Montemor. Oh my god, this is another time travel book. I told you I love me some time travel. This is actually set on New Year's Eve of 1989, so if you're looking for a New Year's read, this would be perfect. And she's about to have her 18th birthday at midnight when the clock strikes, and they're like, woo, yay, happy birthday, Una! And she wakes up and she's in a completely different year of her life. And she comes to find out that every year after her 18th birthday, she's going to be living her life out of order. It's going to be a random year. So she thought she was turning 18. She wakes up, she's 65. The next year, she thinks she's going to turn 66. Nope, she wakes up and she's 32. She basically lives her entire life out of order. And as she's doing this, she's trying to put together the pieces of how her life worked out, and also kind of like examining the butterfly effect of when she makes changes or deviates from the path in earlier years, what ends up happening in later years. I I absolutely love the time travel elements. I also love the like different eras that we get to visit, the 80s, the 90s, the Y2K vibes of it all. This is one of my favorite books of all time because of the character development. There are also some amazing twists in here. This is not a thriller by any means. It's definitely purely magical realism, but the twists in here, the reveals are shocking, scandalous. I'm obsessed. It blew my socks off. I did not think that this was gonna be as impactful as it was, and I recommend it to everyone. And let's close out with one of my favorite books of this year, 2024. I read this one on a plane, and I fear the entire Delta flight saw me cry my eyes out. There was one point it was dead silent, and I was literally and I just knew the entire plane was looking at me, but I just couldn't not. Okay, it's that good. And that is Expiration Dates by Rebecca Searle. Oh my god, I love this main character so much. And when I've read the negative reviews for this book, a lot of the negative reviews are like, the main character was insufferable, I literally hated her. And I'm like, that's crazy because she is me. I get her on a visceral level. Sorry, you can't handle my type A perfectionist, insufferable, flighty, avoidant girl behavior. And the thing about our main character is that every time she gets into a relationship, the world, the wind, whatever it is, God, she in the sky, whoever, just sends her a little slip of paper that says the guy's name that she's about to get into a relationship with and the amount of time that that relationship will last. So she knows exactly when to cut and run. She doesn't have to rely on her instinct. She can avoid all of her emotions, and she knows exactly when it's going to come to an end. But there's a wrench thrown into things when she receives a piece of paper with a guy's name and no end date. So she doesn't know if she's just gonna die before the end of this relationship, if this is gonna be her forever person and there's no one else. She has no idea. She, for the first time in her life, has to check in with herself and her own sense of things and face her emotions and decide, does she actually really want to be in this relationship? Is she going to trust the piece of paper that didn't have the expiration date on it? It is so emotional. I feel like if you're dating right now, you need to read this book. If you are in the cycle of like getting on Hinge and then deleting it, you need to read this book. It is about how much of your personal development and sense of self is involved in finding a romantic partner and one that works for you because you like them and you know you like them rather than just someone who's willing to be with you. It is so deeply meaningful. I love the trajectory of our main character over the course of the book. Everything about it is perfect to me. I ugly cried on the plane. If that doesn't make you want to pick it up, I don't know what will. And with that, those are my top 12 magical realism recs for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video and got a couple good recommendations. If you want 4 more recommendations, I will have the bonus extended cut of this video up on Patreon right now. So if you can't get enough of the magical realism recs, go check that out. My Patreon is always linked down below. Thank you guys again so much for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to go to therapy and read a book this week, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!